It's time for the Property Podcast, where every week tens of thousands of property investors, new and experienced, join together to get news, knowledge and laughs at our expense. With me, Rob Bence.
And me, Rob Dix. Join us every Thursday morning for your weekly dose of property ideas and motivation. Then head over to our website at thepropertypodcast.com to keep the conversation going. Now though, let's get started.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Property Podcast. It is episode 124. I'm still Rob B. With me is still Rob D. Good day, Rob.
G'day.
I'm running out of different type of hellos.
Yeah, we are. We should be running out of conversation as well, because I feel like we've seen each other pretty much every day for the last week, haven't we? There's been so much going on.
That is, Rob, but you are going away, so let's spend these precious hours together before you do shoot off across the globe again. We're not going that far, but still, you're not in the UK.
It's true. And of course, we're nowhere near running out of conversation because there's always loads to talk about in the world of property. And today we are talking about post-budget survival tactics for property investors. I know the last week's episode was really popular, explaining some of the changes. And today we're going to be helping you to put some of that new knowledge into use and seeing what you should be doing in the light of George's budget from a few weeks back. So that is coming up along with the news story and the resource as always. We've also got loads to talk about as well in terms of the world of the Property Hub. Because this week just gone, for us, a couple of weeks ago now for you, we had not only the Property Hub Summit, but we also had our London meetup, and the Property Hub magazine will have been dropping through letterboxes this week. So it's been one of the most exciting weeks for ages, because we've actually got to go out there, meet everyone, have some really great conversations, and we've seen issue 2 of the magazine for the first time, which is a brilliant moment as well. So it's been really exciting.
Yeah, super busy week, but it's so good to see so many people and so many new faces as well at the meetup. That was really cool too. So, you know, there's people who've been coming to every one, which is awesome, but so many new faces, and everyone loved the new venue as well, which is cool. So that went down really well. And then the summit, as you say, Rob, that was just awesome. It was a really cool group, really enjoyed it. And, from the feedback we were getting at the end, albeit we've been to the pub and had a couple of beers before we went home, I'm sure it was added enthusiasm because of that, but everyone seemed very happy. So all in all, a very good but busy week, and of course, everyone getting the magazines too. So, yeah, I don't know if I want to top it this week because it was so hectic, but it's certainly an exciting week nevertheless. And exciting the budget. I don't know if you call it exciting, but I tell you what is exciting, Rob: the fact that you can get a book for half price right now.
Oh yeah. So if you haven't been on your summer holiday yet, I've got a bit of summer holiday reading for you. I've decided to make my book Beyond the Bricks half price until the 6th of August. Amazon doesn't let you discount things too much, but you get a certain number of days each year. So I'm going to use those. So if you haven't shot off on holiday yet and you want to be getting some property inspiration by the pool or on the beach, then now is the perfect time to pick up Beyond the Bricks if you haven't read it already. Go over to thepropertyhub.net/BTB, Beyond the Bricks, and that will link you over to Amazon and you'll be able to take advantage of that offer. You'll also find that link in the show notes today. Loads of important stuff in the show notes this week, which is at thepropertyhub.net/budget2015 part 2. So lots of numbers in there, but it's worth typing them all in because it will get you to the show notes where there's loads of great information.
It will. Now it's time for our news story of the week. Now, Rob, you picked a story from The Guardian. Lots more data for everyone in this one. Now, The Guardian, not often that it has negative stories around landlords, but they've managed to find one.
Somehow they dug one up. But the even more strange thing is I kind of agree with them on this one. They are reporting on this information that was put together by a publication called Environmental Health News, must read, which won a Freedom of Information case against the Ministry of Justice, which basically forced them to release all the names of people who've been prosecuted for providing poor quality or unlicensed homes. So in the show notes, there's a link to the raw data so you can actually go and see in your local area who has been doing things that they shouldn't be doing. But the overall takeaway from this seems to be that actually providing good accommodation, well, you might as well not bother because the worst landlord, what's being branded as the worst landlord in the UK, in Haringey, North London, has been fined 7 times, but has only been fined £16,565, and her rental income is estimated at £188,000 a year. So it seems like a fairly sound business decision, if not a moral one, to actually flout all the rules anyway, because you don't get into that much trouble. For once, I'm kind of on the side of The Guardian because they think this is all outrageous. But I do think that given the amount of legislation that we've got about various and many things, you would have thought that the fines would be more severe. But anyway, in the show notes, you'll find a link to The Guardian story and to the data as well. So you can go through, see who's been committing violations near you, and make sure you're not on that list as well.
Let's hope you're not. I'm sure none of our listeners are, Rob. No, just aside, it's really unbelievable. You know, there's a few landlords that give a lot of people a bad name, but I think it should be a lot more than fines for some of the things you do. I think it should be prison sentences, personally, for some of the stuff you see out there. But while the incentive isn't there to behave for them, except the moral reason, I can't see those naughty people changing. The fact that the person is a repeat offender, the top one, shows that the fines don't bother them. But what may bother them is the tax implications. Now, we talked a lot about this last week, Rob, but this week we're looking at survival tactics for property investors. And because there's quite a lot to do. But if you do it, you can put yourself in a much better position.
Yeah, so in issue 2 of the Property Hub magazine, which hopefully will have dropped through your door by now if you're a subscriber, we've got an article about this as well. And one of the main kind of takeaways at the end of that, or the conclusions, is that if you know what you're doing, there's a lot you can do. And with this budget, it's going to be the amateurs, the people who've just got a property on the side that they don't really think about too much. They don't have access to information or to professional advice. They're the people who are going to get really clobbered by this. So there is absolutely loads that you can do. It's still not a great budget, but there's a lot you can do about it. I'd recommend, if you haven't listened to last week's episode yet, hit pause, go back and listen to last week's episode at thepropertyhub.net/budget 2015, because that's where we describe some of the changes that have happened. And in this week, we're going to be saying, okay, well, based on those, what is there that we should be doing about it? So we've got plenty to get through. Rob, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, let's go. Okay, so the first one is removal of the 10% wear and tear allowance. Now, as Rob said, we're not going to go back through and explain what all these are, because we did that in detail last week, so make sure you go and do that. You link to it in the show notes if you want to find it. But the removal of the 10% wear and tear allowance is ending in 2016. So what should you do? Well, you should, for the remainder of the time, claim your 10% wear and tear allowance. But where possible, defer spending money on furniture until after April 2016, because then this claim is actually replaceable cost. So if you haven't got much going on, or you think, oh, you know what, I might change that, don't do it now on a whim. Wait until after April 2016 and then do it, because then it's a cost you can write off directly. Whereas at the moment, if you did it, it's just part of your 10%. So if you can defer, and sometimes you can't, you know, if your tenant has a bed and it breaks, you can't say, come back to me after April 2016. You'll end on that list we talked about before. But if you can defer any furniture purchases, then do it after April 2016. The other thing you may want to consider is your actual strategy. If you don't need to let your property furnished, and remember some markets dictate it and you really don't have a choice, but if you don't need to let it furnished, maybe consider not going down that option in the future, because the tax incentives aren't as good as they once were. And also remember, letting a property furnished, you tend to have to replace stuff more often, which you can claim back, but it's still time, hassle. But if people move their own stuff in, they're more likely to stay longer, because the hassle of moving is just something you don't want to keep doing it over and over again. And also more likely to treat it like their own place. So the general condition of the property gets looked after that little bit better too. So there's now even more incentive for you to let your property unfurnished if possible. As I said, you know, some city centre destinations, locations dictate that you really have to have furnished properties, but many areas don't. Perhaps trial letting your properties online saying furnished or unfurnished and see what the demand is. But from April 2016, that tactic's certainly not as attractive.
Yeah, we were having a debate about this at the summit, and I was saying how I've actually been quite a fan of letting furniture. I completely agree with your arguments, Rob, but because of the things like the tax break and the fact that it's not actually a lot of work, I'm quite happy to have some of my properties furnished, but I will be reconsidering that as they come up, because a nice little incentive has gone away. Okay, another thing that happened in the budget is that there's been an increase in tax on dividends. So whereas previously, if you were a basic rate taxpayer, you'd end up paying effectively no tax at all on your dividends, you now will be. And if you're a higher rate taxpayer, you'll be paying even more than you were before. So this is only tangentially related to property. So if you've got your properties owned by a limited company and you want to take money out of those in the form of dividends, that's what you've been doing so far. Or if you are a contractor or you have your own company and you pay yourself in dividends, which I know a lot of people do as well, then this will be affecting you. So what can you do about it? Well, one-off action that you can take, which is quite an obvious one, but take dividends before April 2016. That's when it comes in, but up until then, you can take as much as you like. So if you've been letting profits build up within the company, one thing that you can do is pay yourself out as much as you possibly can before next April. Beyond that, you can be thinking about different ways to withdraw profits in the future. And some of this links into a debate that we're going to be having about limited companies. But just to touch on a couple of things, one thing that you could do is look at employing family members. So if you've got a spouse or you've got children over the age of 18, you might be able to employ them, pay them a low salary, avoid some tax there. Also, lending to another company that you control is an option as well. There are ways of kind of shifting income around without actually taking dividends. This is still not a nice tax. It would be better if it wasn't there, but there are some things that you can do to mitigate the impact of it.
Now, Rob's touched on, companies there. And if you haven't got a company, then one of the things you may consider is setting up a company. Because if you do, then companies can still claim interest relief as a deduction. So the main reason behind doing this at all is the restriction of interest relief. So that's the main thing that most people are talking about post-budget. But if you move into a company, that may be a good strategy for you. I say maybe, we'll come to that in a moment. But companies still claim interest as a deduction, so you get that benefit. Corporation tax is also lowering right down to 18%, currently 20%, which is pretty good because that's been falling over the years already, but it's going to be coming down to 18%. That, if you consider that versus possible personal tax of 40% for higher income earners, so 18 versus 40, that's certainly more attractive. However, there are stamp duty and finance implications when doing this. Maybe capital gains tax too, depending on the size of your portfolio. So it's not black and white. It's not everyone move into a company. This also potentially opens you up to double taxation if you need to get the profit. So what we mean by this is that if you have money in a company, you pay your corporation tax, but then if you take it out to pay yourself, and that then takes you into the higher tax threshold, then you're paying tax on that as well. So it's not black and white. It's not clear to say you should be moving into a company. And Rob, you're going to talk about it a little bit more now, but we are going to talk about this more next week. I may as well let it out the bag now. We're going to talk about whether you should be forming a company or not next week in some detail, because again, there's so much to talk about since George had his way. So we've got to cover that as well. But creating your future portfolio in a company or moving your existing portfolio into a company may be something you want to consider.
Yeah, and when we were putting this episode together, we just realised there was so much to say about it that we are going to give it its own episode next week. And it's also something that I think came up in pretty much every single conversation I had at the meetup and at the summit last week. So it's clearly something that we need to go into in detail because, as Rob says, there is no quick answer to it. It needs to be explored in some detail. But let's for a moment put that to one side and let's pretend that limited companies don't exist and say, okay, well, if you're not going to do that, what other ways are there that you can reduce your taxable profits in the light of the restriction on interest relief? Because the background to this is that because of how profit is going to be calculated under the new way of doing things, it's going to push more lower earners into the 40% band. So it not only restricts the relief that you get if you're a higher rate taxpayer, more people who are kind of around the edges of the threshold will become 40% taxpayers. Because even if nothing changes in your portfolio, it's suddenly going to look more profitable because you can't take interest as a deduction. It's worth saying quickly that this, of course, may change before it comes in. So we're all working off the HMRC impact statement, which talks about this. It seems pretty bonkers. And so it's entirely possible that they'll look at this and go, oh, actually, maybe we won't calculate it in this way. But for now, we're assuming that this is what's going to happen. What can you do about it if you want to reduce your paper profits and therefore pay less tax? Well, one thing you can do is pay yourself or a company you control for time spent on managing your portfolio. So if you say, okay, well, I spend time on acquiring property and on managing property, I'm therefore going to pay myself 20% for managing my portfolio. That removes some profit from your portfolio and potentially puts it into a company where it can be withdrawn or saved up. Lots of different ways of cracking that one, but it must reflect reality. So you shouldn't, for example, if you're using a letting agent, then also say, oh yeah, well, I manage my portfolio, and give yourself a big deduction for that. You've got to reflect reality if you're investigated, but it is something that you can legitimately do if it's true. Another one, which I think is possibly one of the best ways of getting around this, it's not the easiest way, but it works, is to buy properties that need refurbs. So if you buy a property that needs work doing to it, let it for a short period first, then do the work. Then the work that you do will count as revenue expenditure. Therefore, that will generate a loss, which will offset profits from elsewhere in your portfolio. And if it generates even more of a loss beyond break even, then it will potentially be carried forward into future years. You can then, of course, hold on to that property, or you could sell that property, make a capital gain, and what you've effectively done is turned your rental revenue income into a capital gain, for which there are exemptions and so on. So it's not an easy way of doing things, but it does work. Another thing that you can do is split ownership differently between spouses if you're married. So, for example, you could become tenants in common and split the beneficial ownership into unequal shares and elect to have your income distributed according to those shares. So essentially, if you've got one person who's a higher rate taxpayer and another who's a basic rate taxpayer, you might be able to change the structure in which the property is owned and the way that that the income is distributed, which could have the effect of you paying less tax overall. A couple of things to mention on that is, firstly, it may require approval from your mortgage lender. And also, if you're married or in a single partnership, then the way that the income is split must follow the way that the ownership is split. If you are joint owners who aren't married or civil partners, then you can split the income in any shares you like, and it's all a whole lot easier. So that's a lot in there. That might not have felt quick, but that really was just a quick run through of a few things that you can do. All worth digging into a little bit more if you're affected. But I hope it gives you the idea that there is actually a lot that's still within your control, even as a result of these changes. And it's worth looking into all this stuff because it can make a really big difference.
It can. And as Rob said, there's a lot to cover here. And that's why we're going to be doing a third episode as well, looking at companies next week. But actually, we're going to do even more than that. And it's been a while, Rob, since we've put a course out on the Property Hub. But Georgie Boy has pushed us to do it. So we're going to be creating a course on tax strategies for property investors on the Property Hub. Now, don't go diving into Property Hub now because it's not there. But let's put a deadline on it, Rob. Here we go. Live pressure. Next week's podcast, when that goes live on the companies, so will the course. So the course will be online as well.
Well, we were talking about accountability all day on Saturday and how important it was. So I suppose a bit of accountability for us is no bad thing. Yeah, I think that's a good idea because there is just so much to cover. Not everyone is going to want an hour and a half long podcast going on and on about it. But if you are interested, you can dive into the course and we'll actually be able to show you some graphs, some worked examples and things like that and make it all a little bit easier to understand.
Yeah, because a lot of this, of course, it's so much easier when it's visual. You know, some courses and topics we cover, it's just very easy to pick up. But because there's so much detail and so many numbers and so many options, I think the course will help. Now, for those who are new to the Property Hub and the Property Podcast, you're probably thinking, oh, how much are they going to charge me for this? It's free. All our courses are free. We'll link to in the show notes the current courses we've got. There's a course on some tax tips. It might be a little bit out of date now, and we'll update that too. There's a tax tips course there already, but there's courses on goals, there's courses on systems. There's loads there that you can take advantage of already. We'll link to it in the show notes, as I say, but it's free, and this next course will be free as well.
Yes, indeed. So that is our second episode on the budget, post-budget survival tactics. Some people, I think, as a result of the budget, will see forming a company as the natural answer, but it's not right for everyone. That's why we're going to be talking about that in a lot more depth next week. But there are lots of other things that you can do as well. We've run through some of those. We'll be going into a lot more detail on those in the course. But the main takeaway, I think, is to take action. You've got some time. Not everything's kicking in straight away, but it's really worth taking control of this. If it's something that you've always just shied away from before because it seems a bit complicated and a bit boring, well, yeah, it is a bit complicated and a bit boring, but there's nothing boring about saving a lot of money. And the great thing about having access to all this free knowledge that's out there is you can put that to work for yourself. And this is one of those situations where your return on effort could be extremely high.
It really could. And actually, I'm going to end this on a high. If you've not yet implemented some of the strategies we'll talk about next week, and they are right for you, and you'll be able to discover that, then actually you could be better off. So not only changing just to minimise the impact of the current budget, no, actually you could be better off doing it right now. Not waiting for the budget implications to kick in. Actually, you could be so much better off. If you currently own a business or you're a contractor, there's going to be some really interesting tactics and strategies you can use next week. If you work and you're employed, don't worry, there's stuff there for you too. It might not work for you, unfortunately, but for those it does work for next week, I think you're going to be pretty pleased. So, time for our resource of the week now. Now, Rob, we started to talk about this resource off air earlier, and I was like, oh yeah, I've heard of that. Oh, did you find it good? I was like, actually, whoa, hold up. I'll actually ask you on the podcast because we'll end up doing it twice. So, Rob, resource of the week, Flux. I'll let you explain what it is. I've heard of it before, never used it, and I wondered if it's any good.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, as you say, it's called Flux. It's available for Mac, Windows, and iPhone. Not Android at the moment, unfortunately. Link to it will be in the show notes. And essentially, what it is you might have heard of this before, but computer screens and phone screens and all that kind of thing emit a certain kind of bluish light, which can really mess with your sleep cycle. So the idea is if you're working on your laptop in the evening or you're reading on your iPad in bed just before you try and go to sleep, it basically messes with your circadian rhythms, and it means that you might have trouble getting to sleep. So if you find it takes you a while to drop off, that could be one of the reasons for that. And what Flux does, it's really clever, is it, based on the time of day, it filters your output. So it actually removes the type of light that can mess with your circadian rhythms. So effectively what it does is from about 9 p.m. onwards, it starts gradually shifting the color balance of your screen. So everything gets a bit more of a reddish tinge is effectively how it looks because it's taking out a certain part of the spectrum. So it's really simple. It's something you just install, you forget about it, and it automatically changes the balance for you throughout the day. Does it work? Well, I can't say for sure because I never really have trouble getting to sleep unless I've got loads on my mind. Normally, I'm just so knackered by the evening that I'll drop off instantly. But I'd say that all the research does show that this does make an impact. So if it's something that you struggle with, then it's well worth giving it a try because, well, it's free and it's no effort at all. You do it once and then you forget about it.
It does sound good, Rob. It does sound good. But don't do it when you're reading any of the Property Hub stuff because we don't want you falling asleep to that, of course, especially the tax stuff. Actually, it's been a great week because meeting so many other property investors, everyone's like, oh, I've got a resource for you. So the next few weeks, we've actually got resources just based on talking to different people over the last week. So thank you to all those people who offered us resources. I was making notes in Trello as we were going through and everyone offered a suggestion. So some really cool resources coming up over the next few weeks. And actually, some of the resources we've used in the past have really helped us this week. You know, Trello, we organise our lives on. I think we probably mention that every week. But also, on the way to the meetup, I used Uber, such a cool app. I know it's a bit controversial, Uber, but it's reliable and you know what you're getting. And then also TaskRabbit, the lovely lady who helped us out on the event at the meetup. She was hired early in the day on TaskRabbit, did an incredible job, and then disappeared. You know, so easy. So many of the resources we talked about, we don't just mention and never use again. You can really take them and change things. Because TaskRabbit, I mean, another one, furniture. If you're assembling furniture and you live in the southeast, you're nuts because there's people who will do it for you for not a lot amount of money. Why don't you let them do it? Unless you like doing it. Well, then if you do, please come round to my house and do it for free.
Yeah, we do practice what we preach, and there's loads of great stuff. If you go to thepropertyhub.net/tools, you will in fact find every resource that we've ever talked about for all 124 episodes. So if you are short of inspiration, you'll find a lot of it there. Don't go to that page if you've got anything to do today, because you will end up wasting your entire day. Well, not wasting, investing. But either way, you should perhaps limit yourself a little bit.
What you should not limit, though, is your generous reviews. So thank you to Joe for his review this week. And he says, "Hi Rob and Rob, I just wanted to thank you for all the excellent materials you produce. I started listening to your podcast 2 months ago and since gone through every single episode, as well as purchased your books and subscribed to your magazine. Thank you, Joe. I've also found the content very easy to follow, informative and motivational. I've now taken your advice and set my goals, both short and long term, as well as my strategy. I've had an interest in property and became a landlord a few years back. I feel since discovering your podcasts and reading your books, as well as others, it's opened new doors for me. It's like a eureka moment. This has given me a new passion for property, and I'm at present dedicating a lot of time to learning, researching areas to invest in, and hopefully finding some deals. I've also taken your advice in networking, and I've joined lots of groups, as also discovering acquaintances who are property investors too. I'm in the process of organising a meet-up in London via the Property Hub, which can be a regular meet for sharing knowledge and ideas as well as meeting new people. Thanks again, Rob. Keep up the great work, Joe." And Joe has, since this review, started that meet-up. It's in South London. It happens every month. We're going to talk about meet-ups in a lot more detail in coming weeks. Obviously, we're very tax-orientated at the moment. We've had a meet-up recently, but we've got some good news down the line coming on meet-ups, so stay tuned. But check out, in the meantime, the events box, which is in the Property Hub, in the forum. In the top right corner, you'll see upcoming events. So if there's any meetups happening in your area, you can check there. But as I say, lots coming on now. I won't say too much now, but lots more coming on meetups soon.
Yes, plenty to come on that front. Plenty to come on the podcast. Next week, we're going to be talking about limited companies, yes or no. We're going to be talking about that debate in a lot more detail. And in the meantime, to see you through until next week, get over to the Property Hub. If you're interested in the kind of thing that we've been talking about, then you'll find, I would say, the best informed discussion on the internet about what's been happening as a result of the budget. It's not something that's been talked about coherently and politely in many places. We've got a fantastic thread about that, plus threads about all kinds of stuff as well. And there's over 100 new members joining the hub every week at the moment. It's absolutely huge. So if you've got a question or you've got something to add, it's a fantastic place to go and get involved, because you will find like-minded people to bounce ideas around with and get answers from. So if you're not checking out the Property Hub forum regularly, do it. It's a fantastic resource, which we can say because it's no thanks to us, really. It's thanks to everyone else who makes that such a fantastic resource. But it's somewhere that you should definitely be happy hanging out if you've got any interest in what we've been talking about today.
Yeah, and as we said before, everything on the hub is completely free. So you can access the progress journals, see what people are up to and their progress on their property goals. You can access all the courses for free. You can access all the resources for free. And of course, all the amazing content that people are creating on a daily basis. So every week at the moment, it seems to break a record of new memberships, but it's over 100 every single week as a bare minimum. So incredible growth, very exciting, and make sure you check it out. So that should keep you busy until this time next week, when we will be bringing you another property tax episode, and we'll be releasing that course we mentioned too. So Rob, we better hang up our mics and go and create that.
Better get to work. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Property Podcast. Make sure you join our mailing list at thepropertypodcast.com.
And remember, we love 5-star reviews. Rob even loves them more than air miles.